Hi there, grief growers. As you can tell from the title of this episode is the last episode of Season 2 of Coming Back. Thank you so much for listening. At the beginning of 2018, I let all of you know about my new show format, which is 12 episodes on and 1 month off, and this is episode number 12 for Season 2. So I'll be taking now through April 30th off from releasing new shows and taking some time to rest, reflect, reach out for new guests and new topics, and kind of energetically seal up these first 3 months of 2018. Before I go, though, I want to leave you with a theme that I picked up from all of these season's guests and just pass along some final insights to ponder while I'm away. As I was replaying this season's episodes, I noticed that all of them, through all of their coming back stories, had a theme in common, no matter how varied their losses and careers and demographics were. And that is, you've got to say yes to grief. You've got to sign up to do the grief thing. You've got to be receptive. You've got to be open to this. You've got to be ready, but most of all, you've got to say yes. Because when we grieve, we're signing an energetic contract that says yes to exploring our feelings, acknowledging and accepting everything that's happened to us, looking really, really closely at our dark places, and becoming more interested in the impact that our grief has had on our bodies, our minds, our spirits, and of course, the circle of people around us. So many people do not say yes, grief growers. What they do is they skim the surface of their loss, thinking that they have to be strong and carry on, or they believe if they start crying or start the mourning process that they won't ever be able to stop. Some people can even see it. They can see the powerful impact that truly grieving would have on their lives, and they don't feel ready to make those kinds of big changes because grief insists that we change. So some people don't. It's not easy to say yes to grief. In fact, it's one of the hardest things that I ever had to do. If you've read my website, you know when this exact moment was for me. I have an aunt who's an intuitive who lives out in California, and in the months following my mom's death, she and I were on the phone a lot. She would give me energetic readings, help me uncover messages and decipher dreams of my mom, and just hold me in this space of loving and looking at my grief. I was super, super lucky, especially looking back now. I was so lucky to have her on call in that aftermath because I was really falling apart and I was feeling a lot of stuff. A big thing that I learned about my grief in this time is that my default emotion is not usually sadness with grief. It's rage. So I was mad at a lot of things when my mom died. God was one of them. I hadn't believed in God for a while when my mom died, and I could not picture a world with a loving God, quote unquote loving God, when my mom wasn't on the planet anymore. The hows of how God operated confused and enraged me, and I had firmly decided in this immediate aftermath of grief that God was not someone I wanted to get to know. Until one day during one of our calls, my aunt offered to bring God in on our conversation. I was kind of surprised at this suggestion and almost morbidly humored at this idea. Like, yeah, right. What's God going to do for me? And she did this exercise with me where I closed my eyes and I felt into my heart space. And then she told me to picture God standing across from me and more or less told me that I needed to have a conversation with God. When I told her that I didn't have anything to say to God, or I released all of this anger onto God, she asked me how I thought God would respond to this, to all of my grief. And in that moment, my heart answered. God said, I wish you would just let me hold you. And that moment, grief growers, that moment was when I said yes to grief. It was like a little piece of my heart came cracking open, and I agreed to energetically fall into the pain that I was so angry about and so resistant to and so in need of controlling and getting rid of. In that moment, I wish you would just let me hold you. I said yes to grief. Now I have to let you know, full disclosure, that I did not come back overnight. You still see me working on it, and I didn't feel noticeably better the next day. Actually, I felt kind of like I had an energetic hangover, which is a whole other kind of conversation. But in that moment, I agreed to stop fighting what had happened and was happening in my world, and be held by something else, energetically at first, by my aunt and God and a few small others. But then slowly I agreed to be held by my friends and my family, by books and by bloggers, the story of others, and by my own spirit, which I found was still alive and beating under the gigantic garbage heap of grief. I didn't want to say yes, but I did. I didn't want my mom's death to be my life, but it was. And I didn't want to have to come back, but I did. Dr. Gladys Otto calls it acceptance before you do the work of a good goodbye. Katie Scoggins calls it letting down your resistance to reality. Darwin Dave simply calls it being open. Whatever you call it, my beautiful grief growers, you have to do it. You have to say yes in order to come back. You have to look around and survey your grief-torn land and say, yes, okay, I'm signing up to feel and sift through and experience all of this. The onus is on me to do the work of grief. If you've listened to the show long enough, you know it's not up to time, to books, to a therapist, or even your friends and your family to make you come back. And if you've listened to the show long enough, you also know that you don't have to have your ducks in a row, or your shit together, or your life on track to start. You've just got to say yes to being a full-fledged, open-hearted participant in your grief. That is the big, resounding, I've got chills over here message from season 2. My grief growers, go back and listen to all of these episodes again and see if you can pick that out from each interview. You've got to say yes. You've got to be willing. You've got to be blindly trusting that this will end and that saying yes will bring you to the other side. You've got to be blindly trusting of that. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And you, only you, are the person who is able to say yes to your grief. You've got to say yes. Yeah, there it is. That's what I have for you this week and this season, grief growers. I hope you've enjoyed everything that I've brought your way. Before I go for a little bit, I want to make a slew of announcements that I hope you'll stick around for. Some of them involve special notes, and you might even win something. So let's do the rundown. First, please continue to look for Coming Back in your podcast feed. Just because I'm not producing anything new does not mean I'm leaving you empty-handed for the month of April. So please look for short mini episodes of Coming Back between now and the season 3 debut of Coming Back, which happens on May 2nd, 2018. Second, during this period of podcast break, I am holding a giveaway contest to anyone who supports the show on Patreon or pledges to support the show by April 30th. This is when I'll start to be coming back to the show. Between now and then, if you are pledging on Patreon right now or pledge before April 30th, you will be entered into a giveaway to win 2 copies. These are paper back copies of the Grief Recovery Handbook, which I will ship to the address of your choice, along with some podcast-themed stickers and a sweet little thank you note for listening. Remember, this is the book. The Grief Recovery Handbook is the book that changed my life and got me started on the road to coming back from grief and loss. It's got one of my all-time favorite topics and one of my most listened episode topics in there called The 6 Grief Myths, plus a formulated step-by-step action plan for releasing and completing a relationship that was left emotionally incomplete by loss. I just love this book so much, so I'm sending you 2 copies, one for you, one for a friend, and some stickers, and a note to say thank you so much for being a supporter on Patreon. And again, this is for anyone who's already pledging on Patreon right now, or anyone who is pledging by April 30th. So go ahead and go over and make your pledges now at patreon.com/ShelbyForsythia. If this show has changed the way you look at grief in the world, this is such a great way to keep the podcast and my work as an intuitive grief guide going. You can pledge or enter the giveaway for as little as $1 per month, which is a great deal considering all of the cool stuff I'm sending your way. And of course, as always, you can increase or decrease your support at any time. Again, the link is patreon.com/ShelbyForsythia to make your pledge, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. Patreon supporters also get access to behind-the-scenes stuff from me and exclusive online events, which brings me to my next item on the list. So, third announcement. I am hosting my March Google Hangout this coming Sunday, March 25th at 8 o'clock p.m., and I'm hosting my monthly April Google Hangout on Sunday, April 29th at 7 o'clock p.m., and these are both in Central Standard Time. Just as a reminder, these Google Hangouts are an hour-long chat room-style time for anyone pledging $33 per month or more on Patreon to ask questions about grief and loss, get help with resources for friends and family or others who are grieving, or just talk about whatever's on your mind. You bring your questions to the table, and for a full hour, you've got my eyes and ears on your world. I love doing this every single month, and I am so excited to see you on Google Hangouts. Again, this is for anyone supporting the show at $33 a month or more on Patreon. So if you'd like to join us this coming Sunday, or for our Google Hangouts in April, you can head on over to patreon.com/ShelbyForsythia to pledge. Fourth announcement, I will be part of 2 free events in the month of April if you would like to attend. The first event is an online event called Grief and Healing Corner, and that's hosted by Sharon Ellers, who I interviewed for episode 6 of Coming Back. She and I are going to be jumping on Facebook Live on her Facebook page, which is called Grief Reiki, Reiki, for a chat about my grief story and how I'm helping others to heal day to day. This is taking place on Tuesday, April 3rd at 8:30 p.m. Central Time, and all you have to do is like her Facebook page, Grief Reiki, Reiki is spelled Reiki, to get notified when the broadcast begins. I will definitely put a link to her page in the show notes, and I will also be posting a replay of our interview on my Facebook page for all of you to see after the interview has concluded. The second free event that's coming up in April is one that I'm actually hosting myself, and it is a live event in Seattle, Washington. This is the first time that I'm doing anything like this. So I'm taking some time away from Chicago in the month of April to see some new sights and to take in new experiences in Seattle, Washington, and I would love to see you on my last day in town. So I'm hosting a Coming Back listener meetup that is totally 100% free to attend, and that's on Monday, April 23rd at 4 o'clock p.m. on the 7th floor patio of the 4th and Madison building. This is a privately owned public space. So there's the sunny patio, there's a garden, little plants. I believe there's a coffee shop nearby. We'll all find out together. What I'll be doing is staking out a little section of the patio for 2 hours until 6 o'clock p.m. Seattle time, so from 4 to 6. So come hang out. If you'd like to join me, you can come after work or grab that cup of coffee that we're going to find together, and we'll just chat and hang out. This is super casual. This is not, a grief recovery session. I just think it would be so neat to see some of you from across the country before I fly back to my little haven in the Midwest. You can find out more about this event on my Facebook page, Shelby Forsythia Intuitive Grief Guide, or my website, shelbyforsythia.com. And if you could, please RSVP. I need to know who to look out for when I'm up on the roof. And if you do not have a Facebook page, if you can't say going or interested or however it works on Facebook, I would so love if you RSVP'd by email, shelby@shelbyforsythia.com, so I can keep my eye out for you the day of. Lastly, last big announcement of this pre-break season finale. If you have suggestions, questions, comments, guests, or topics you would like to see come on season 3 of Coming Back, please, please, please send them my way. So many of our interviews here on Coming Back come from your suggestions, grief growers, and I would so love to know who is inspiring you out there in the world. If you've got a question or a topic you'd like covered on an upcoming show, I would love to hear about that as well. So please email me at shelby@shelbyforsythia.com, subject line podcast, with your guest suggestions and questions for season 3, which debuts in May. I cannot wait to be back podcasting with you. So that's all for this episode and this season of Coming Back. Thank you so much to all of our guests who appeared this season: Dr. Gladys Otto, Harriet Cabelli, Joshua Black, Morgan Brown, Kimberly Wilson, Corin Holmes, Caleb Wild, Carrie Egan, Katie Scoggins, Darwin Dave, and Candace Ossifort Russell. And thank you so much to all of you grief growers out there who submitted questions and topics for the top of the show segment. I could not do what I do without you. Season 3 of Coming Back will premiere on May 2nd, 2018, but in the meantime, you can listen to bonus episodes which are going to be released every Wednesday, enter a book giveaway on Patreon until April 30th, join me on Google Hangouts in March and in April, watch me on Grief Reiki's Healing Corner, or see me live in Seattle. Listen to this episode again for more details on where you can find me and my work in the meantime and before Season 3 premieres. If you liked what you heard on Season 2 of Coming Back, you can support the show by donating at shelbyforsythia.com/donate. You can subscribe and leave a review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher. You can follow me via Facebook at Shelby Forsythia Intuitive Grief Guide, or Instagram at Grief Guide Shelby Forsythia. And above all else, the very best thing you can do for this show is to share Coming Back with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. Thank you always to Mr. Addie Goldstein, who composed our glorious theme music. And once again, if you'd like to leave a question, comment, or guest suggestion for a future show, leave a voicemail or text 312-725-3043 or email at shelby@shelbyforsythia.com, subject line podcast. As always, my dear grief growers, it was beautiful sharing this space and time with you today. I see you, I am proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.